They mocked my career as a janitor at the reunion. Then I pulled up in my dream house deed. High school reunions are strange purgatory zones where time warps and suddenly everyone's 18 again, even when the wrinkles and receding hairlines tell a different story. I almost didn't go to my 20-year, almost. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for weeks, taunting me. Marshall Heights class of '05. Remember when? Remember what? Being invisible? Being the kid who cleaned the gym after school because my family needed the extra money? The thought made my stomach twist. You should go, Eliza said, refilling her coffee mug one Sunday morning. My wife of 15 years, always my anchor. Show them who Dominic Reyes became. A janitor? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. The best damn facilities manager this side of the Mississippi with 3 apartment buildings to his name, she corrected, kissing my forehead. But if you're not ready to face them, that's okay too. That's always been my struggle. I know objectively that I've built something impressive. Started as a night janitor at Pinnacle Technologies straight out of high school while taking community college classes during the day. Worked my way up to facilities director by 30, managing a staff of 42 across their corporate campus. Started investing in real estate when the market tanked in '08, buying distressed properties nobody wanted. But none of that erases the memory of Vaughn Whitfield and his crowd snickering when they saw me mopping hallways after school. 2 days before the reunion, I got a message from Brennan Diaz, one of the few people from high school who'd stayed in touch. Dude, you're not gonna believe who's organizing this thing, Margot Keller. Remember her? And she's been asking if anyone's heard from you. Margot. God. The girl who'd asked me to help with her bio homework for months, who I thought might actually like me, until I overheard her laughing with her friends about the janitor boy, who would do anything for her attention. That particular wound had never quite healed right. I'm not going, I told Eliza that night. Completely your call, she said, but I saw the tiny flicker of disappointment, though I did buy that new dress. I sighed. You really think I should do this? She put down her book. What I think is that you've been carrying around other people's opinions of you since you were 17. Maybe it's time to put that load down. The thing is, I've never been ashamed of the work I do. My father taught me that. He cleaned office buildings for 30 years, raised 4 kids on that salary, never once complained. There's dignity in making spaces better for others, he'd say. Remember that when they try to tell you otherwise. What bothered me wasn't the job. It was being reduced to just the job, as if pushing a mop defined the entirety of who I was or could become. The night before the reunion, I was in our home office staring at the deed to our newest purchase, a lakefront property we'd closed on last week. My 16th investment property, our dream house, the one Eliza had sketched on cocktail napkins when we were dating, the one I promised her I'd build someday. You know what? I said at breakfast the next morning. Let's go to this thing. Eliza smiled knowingly. What changed your mind? Nothing changed, I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. I just finally realized I don't need to prove anything to anyone. Oh, how wrong I was. The gymnasium hadn't changed much in 20 years. Same institutional smell of floor polish and teenage desperation. Same bleachers where I used to sit alone at lunch until I discovered the library had fewer witnesses to my solitude. Name tags are over there, chirped a woman I didn't recognize immediately. Then she smiled, and suddenly I was looking at Heather Morris, former cheerleader, now sporting a sensible bob and a plastic surgery shine that wasn't fooling anyone. Eliza squeezed my hand. She looked stunning in her emerald dress, hair swept, up the confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was. I felt a surge of gratitude that she'd chosen me, the quiet kid with dirt under his fingernails who'd asked her out 3 times before she said yes. Dominic Reyes. The voice came from behind me, dripping with disbelief in that particular brand of false enthusiasm people reserve for reunions. Vaughn Whitfield, quarterback turned regional sales director according to his name tag. Sporting an expensive watch and a beer gut he was fighting hard to disguise. Vaughn, I nodded, keeping my face neutral. Good to see you. Man, I can't believe you showed. It's been what, 2 decades? What have you been up to? The genuine curiosity. Surprised me. Maybe he had changed, maybe we all had. I work in facilities management, I said simply. He blinked, the information computing. So like, maintenance? A janitor? And there it was, the slight tone shift, the barely concealed pity. He's the executive director of facilities operations. For Pinnacle Technologies, Eliza cut in smoothly. Oversees their entire West Coast division. Oh, Vaughn said, obviously trying to recalibrate. That's great. It is, I agreed. I enjoy the work. Well, you always were good at, he fumbled, cleaning stuff. He laughed awkwardly. Before I could respond, a voice cut through the crowd. Everyone, grab your drinks. We're doing superlatives. Margot Keller. Still beautiful, still commanding attention without effort. She'd aged well, confidence intact. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment I was 17 again, stomach fluttering with hope that would ultimately be crushed. Let's start with most successful, Margot announced. We tallied these based on your RSVP updates, and the winner is Jordan Reynolds, CFO at Goldman Sachs. A guy in an impeccably tailored suit stepped forward to collect a cheap trophy as everyone applauded. I recognized him vaguely. Debate team, I thought. The awards continued. Most traveled. Best looking still. Most kids. Each one accompanied by hoots and hollers and inside jokes I wasn't privy to. Then, most surprising career path. Margot's eyes landed on me. Dominic Reyes. The room went quiet. Then someone, I'm pretty sure it was Trent Coleman, called out, Still cleaning up after the rest of us, Reyes? Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to make my ears burn, my hand tighten around my drink. Actually, another voice added, I heard he's the janitor supervisor now. More laughter. That's executive janitor to you, someone else quipped. I felt Eliza stiffen beside me. I knew she was about to go to battle for me, my defender always. But I placed a gentle hand on her arm. It's okay, I whispered. I got this. I stepped forward to accept the tacky trophy, holding it up like an Oscar. Thanks for this great honor, I said calmly. You know, it's funny. When I was mopping these hallways after hours, I used to imagine what all of you would be doing 20 years later. Never imagined I'd be standing here being laughed at for having clean fingernails and job security. The room got uncomfortably quiet. But here's what's really surprising about my career path. I set the trophy down. It taught me that the people who belittle others' work are usually the ones most terrified of their own insignificance. I smiled. Anyway, I've got an early meeting. Tomorrow with my investment portfolio manager. So we should probably head out. Nice seeing everyone. I took Eliza's hand and turned to leave, heart pounding. Dom, wait, Margot called out. I'm sorry about... That wasn't supposed to be an insult. Stopped and looked back at her. Wasn't it, though? She had the decency to look ashamed, at least. The drive home was tense, my knuckles white against the steering wheel of our Audi. Not the fanciest car in the lot, but paid for in cash, which was more than I could say for some of those luxury leases I'd spotted. They're idiots, Eliza fumed, uncharacteristically angry. Absolute children. Did you see their faces when you mentioned your portfolio manager? I had to smile at that. I didn't actually say anything about what I do outside of Pinnacle. Exactly, she said with satisfaction. Let them wonder. The truth was, I hadn't planned on mentioning my investments at all. It had slipped out in a moment of defensiveness, and I hated that after all these years, they could still make me feel like I needed to prove myself. We drove in silence for a while, the memory of those snide comments festering. Penny for your thoughts? Eliza finally asked. I'm thinking about my dad, I admitted. What he would have said tonight. My father had passed away 5 years ago. Lung cancer. Never smoked a day in his life, just spent decades breathing in industrial cleaning chemicals. His funeral had been small but packed with people whose lives he'd touched. Former clients who told stories about how he'd remembered their kids' names. Co-workers who relied on his steady presence, neighbors he'd helped without being asked. He would have been proud, Eliza said softly. So proud, Dom. The next morning, I woke early as usual, force of habit from years of pre-dawn shifts. I made coffee and sat on our back deck, watching the sunrise over the city skyline. Our home wasn't extravagant, comfortable, but not ostentatious. We'd chosen to invest our money rather than flaunt it. My phone buzzed. A text from Brennan. "You good? That got weird last night." I typed back, "All good, just realized some people never grow up." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Hey, a bunch of us are meeting for brunch. No Vaughn, no Marco, just the normal ones. You and Eliza should come." I hesitated, then typed where and when. That's how we ended up at Harlow's Bistro, sharing mimosas with Brennan and his husband Kai, along with a handful of classmates I barely remembered, but who seemed decent enough now. People who'd been as peripheral to the high school hierarchy as I had been. "I've got a confession," said Renata Lynn, now a pediatric nurse. "I had the biggest crush on you senior year." I nearly choked on my drink. "What? No way." She nodded, laughing. "You were always so quiet and thoughtful. And I saw you helping Ms. Patel carry all those science projects when everyone else just left." "I had no idea," I said truthfully. "That's because you were too busy mooning over Margot Keller," Brennan teased. We all laughed, and surprisingly, it didn't hurt anymore. The mention of Margot felt like discussing a character from a movie I'd seen long ago rather than a central figure in my personal mythology of rejection. "So what do you really do besides facilities management?" asked Diego, a former band kid turned software engineer. Eliza mentioned property investments. I hesitated, old habits of keeping my business private kicking in. But these people weren't. The ones who'd mocked me. And maybe it was time to own my success a little. "I buy apartment buildings," I explained. "Fix them up, keep rents reasonable, build community spaces. Started small after the '08 crash with a duplex that needed work. That's actually really cool," Renata said thoughtfully. "My sister's been priced out of 3 apartments in 2 years." "That's exactly why I do it," I nodded. "Housing shouldn't be just for the wealthy." The conversation flowed easily after that. No posturing, no subtle comparisons of salaries or job titles. Just adults sharing lives that had taken unexpected turns, both good and bad. As we were leaving, Brennan pulled me aside. "The reunion committee's annual post-event meeting is tomorrow night at Margot's place. You should come." "Why would I want to do that?" His eyes twinkled mischievously. "Because they're all freaking out that they misjudged you, and I think it would be educational for them to hear about your work." "Both kinds." I shook my head. "I don't need their validation." "No," he agreed, "but maybe they need to hear what you have to say." I don't know what possessed me to actually show up at Margot Keller's house the next evening. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the lingering sting of those laughs. Or maybe, just maybe, it was time to finally close this chapter for good. Margot lived in Oakwood Terrace, one of those gated communities with aspirational street names like Prosperity Lane and houses that looked impressive from the front but were stacked so close together you could hear your neighbor flush their toilet. I knew the development well. I'd almost bought property there before discovering foundation issues throughout the neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on me. I parked my car on the street, rather than in the circular driveway already filled with shiny SUVs and luxury sedans. This wasn't about showing off. This was about something else entirely. Margot answered the door herself, surprise evident on her face. "Dominic, Brennan said he invited you, but I didn't think you'd actually come." "Just for a bit," I said neutrally. "Hope that's okay." "Of course." She stepped back, gesturing me inside. "We're in the sunroom." I followed her through a house that screamed, "I hired a decorator," rather than, "I live here." Everything was perfectly coordinated, magazine-ready and utterly impersonal. The sunroom held about 10 people, including Vaughn and several other former popular kids whose names I struggled to remember. Conversation halted awkwardly as I entered. "Look, who's here?" Margot announced with forced brightness. "Dominic's joining us." Murmured greetings, uncomfortable glances. I took a seat in an empty chair, declining the offered wine. I didn't plan to stay long enough to finish a glass. We were just discussing whether to change venues for the next reunion. A woman I vaguely recognized explained. The school gym is so high school. Isn't that the point? I asked mildly. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. Dominic, Vaughn began, clearing his throat. About the other night, those comments were out of line, completely unprofessional. Raised an eyebrow. Unprofessional? Inappropriate, he corrected quickly. What I mean is, well, we didn't know. Know what? He shifted uncomfortably. That you're successful now. And there it was, the crux of everything wrong with this entire situation. I was successful when I was cleaning floors too, Vaughn, I said quietly. Just differently than you measured it. A heavy silence fell over the room. Look, I continued, I didn't come here for apologies. I came because we're all adults now, or should be, and I thought maybe we could have an honest conversation about why you all thought it was okay to mock someone's profession. Any profession. It was just a joke, someone muttered. Was it? I challenged. Because my father cleaned offices for 30 years. He put food on our table with that work, paid for my community college with that work. There are people in this city right now making your spaces livable, keeping your buildings functioning, who go invisible every day because people like you can't see past a job title. Margot had the grace to look genuinely remorseful. You're right, she said softly. And I'm sorry, Dom. Not just for the other night, but for back then, too. I met her eyes, surprised by the sincerity I found there. You know, I always wondered if you remembered, I said. The biology tutoring? She nodded. I was terrible to you. I let my friends dictate who I could be seen with. It was cruel and stupid. High school, I shrugged. We were all trying to figure out who we were. Some of us still are, she admitted. The conversation shifted then, becoming somehow both lighter and more meaningful. People sharing regrets, missed opportunities, the fears that had driven their teenage cruelties. Not everyone participated. Some clearly still clung to their high school identities like life rafts, but enough did that it felt like something important was happening. When I finally stood to leave, Vaughn walked me out to my car. You know, he said hesitantly, my company's looking for a facilities management director, corporate headquarters. If you're ever looking to make a change, I smiled politely. Thanks, but I'm pretty happy where I am. Right, of course, he nodded quickly. Just thought I'd mention it. As I drove home, I called Eliza. You'll never believe where I just was, I began. She listened as I recounted the evening, then said thoughtfully, So did it help, getting that closure? I considered the question. I think it did, but not in the way I expected. How so? I realized. I've been carrying around this image of them as these powerful people who judged me, I explained. But they're just people. Flawed, insecure, trying to figure it out like everyone else. My wise husband, she said warmly. Coming home now? On my way, I promised. Hey, what do you think about hosting a dinner for Brennan and the others from brunch? I'd like that, she said. Very much. As I turned onto our street, I felt lighter somehow. Not because I'd proved anything to anyone, but because I finally, truly didn't need to. The week after the reunion passed in a blur of work obligations and property inspections. I'd just closed on a small 8-unit building in the East Side, the neighborhood where I'd grown up, now rapidly gentrifying. My plan was to renovate without displacing the current tenants, mostly seniors and young families, who couldn't afford the skyrocketing rents elsewhere. Mr. Reyes? My assistant, Jordan, knocked on my office door. There's a Margot Keller here. To see you. No appointment. I looked up from my laptop, genuinely surprised. Send her in. Margot entered, looking slightly out of place in her designer suit among my deliberately understated office decor. No mahogany, no pretension. Just clean lines and functional furniture. The only luxury I allowed myself was the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "This is quite the view," she said, gesturing to the cityscape. "It helps me remember why I do what I do," I replied. "Every building out there needs someone to care for it." She nodded, then got straight to the point. "I'm here about Elmwood Heights." I raised an eyebrow. Elmwood Heights was my latest project, an old apartment complex just listed for sale with 30 units in desperate need of updating. I'd viewed it twice already and was preparing an offer. "What about it?" I asked carefully. "My company's developing it," she explained. Margot, I'd learned at the reunion, was now VP of Acquisitions at Platinum Development Group, one of the largest luxury condo developers in the region. "We're turning it into high-end condos, starting price point around $1.2 million. And the current residents?" She had the decency to look uncomfortable. "They'll receive notice, of course, legally required compensation for terminating their leases. Most of those people have lived there for decades," I pointed out. "Where do you expect them to go?" The market doesn't care. About Mrs. Abernathy, who's lived in 3B since 1982? I interrupted. Or the Gonzalez family with 3 kids in public school nearby? Margot shifted. "This is business, Dom. The property owner wants to sell. We're making a compelling offer." "So, I countered. Her eyes widened slightly. But that's a multi-million-dollar purchase." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm aware of the price tag." "But she trailed off, clearly reassessing. "Your company has that kind of capital." "My company is just me," I said simply. "And yes, I do." She blinked, processing this information. "What would you even do with it?" "Renovate intelligently, update systems, keep the existing tenants with minimal rent increases, maybe add rooftop solar to reduce utility costs. But the potential profit is substantial if you're willing to displace 30 families," I finished. For her, "I'm not." She studied me for a long moment. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious." "Why? You could make so much more turning it around and selling." It was a fair question from her perspective. I thought about how to explain it in terms she might understand. "When I was 14, I began. We got evicted. Dad had been injured at work, couldn't clean for 3 months. We fell behind. The new owner wanted to convert to luxury units, so he found reasons to terminate leases. We ended up in a motel for 6 months before finding another place we could afford." I gestured to the city below us. "Every building out there is someone's home. Margot, I do make a profit, a good one in fact, but not at the expense of people who just need a safe, decent place to live." She was quiet for a moment. "I never knew about your family." "Why would you?" I shrugged. "I was just the quiet kid with the free lunch card who cleaned up after basketball games." She winced at that. "For what it's worth, I truly am sorry about how I treated you back then. Water under the bridge," I assured her. "We were kids, and now we're adults bidding against each other," she said with a small smile. "Life is strange." After she left, I called my real estate attorney and told him to submit our offer immediately, above asking price. It would stretch my available capital thin, but some things were worth the risk. That evening, I told Eliza about Margot's visit as we prepared dinner together in our kitchen. Nothing fancy, just pasta with vegetables from our garden. "So she just showed up at your office?" Eliza asked, chopping basil. "Completely unexpected," I confirmed, stirring the sauce. "I think she wanted to feel out our offer, see if she could dissuade me. She clearly still doesn't understand who she's dealing with." Eliza smiled. "No one ever really saw me in high school," I reflected. Maybe that was partly on me, keeping to myself, but it's strange meeting these people as adults and realizing they created entire narratives about who I was, without actually knowing me at all. And now it doesn't matter," I said truthfully. "Their opinion of me isn't my concern anymore." Eliza abandoned her cutting board to wrap her arms around me from behind. "Have I told you lately how proud I am to be married to you?" I turned to face her. "What brought that on?" Just thinking about that scared kid I met in Economics 101 who was working 2 jobs and still found time to help me study, she said. You've never stopped being that person, Dom. You've just gotten better at it. 3 days later, I received the call from my attorney. Our offer on Elmwood Heights had been accepted. The owner had chosen my bid over Platinum's, despite theirs being slightly higher. He said something about preferring to sell to someone who would take care of the building and its people, my attorney explained. Apparently, his late wife grew up there. That night, Eliza and I celebrated with takeout and cheap champagne, a tradition from our early days when every small victory required marking the occasion, but our budget demanded creativity. To Elmwood Heights, Eliza toasted. To making spaces better, I countered, echoing my father's words. As we clinked glasses, my phone buzzed with a text from Margot. Heard about Elmwood. Congratulations. You're not at all who I thought you were. I showed it to Eliza, who raised an eyebrow. Is that supposed to be a compliment? I think it's the closest thing to one that she knows how to give, I said. Are you going to respond? I thought about it, then typed. I'm exactly who I've always been. You just never looked. Summer faded into autumn, and with it came unexpected developments. My acquisition of Elmwood Heights made a small splash in local business circles. Enough that I started receiving calls from other property owners interested in selling to someone with my particular philosophy. Meanwhile, the dinner, Eliza and I hosted for my newfound high school connections evolved into a monthly gathering. Nothing fancy. Potluck style, kids welcome, no pretense. Just people who'd once orbited each other's lives, reconnecting as the adults they'd become. You should consider running for city council, Diego suggested during one such evening, as we discussed the housing crisis over plates of Eliza's famous paella. The West District seat is opening up next year. They need someone who actually understands development without being in developers' pockets. I laughed it off, but the idea lingered. At work, things were changing too. Pinnacle announced a major expansion, and suddenly my facilities management role evolved to include sustainability initiatives across all their campuses. More responsibility, more visibility, more impact. It was during this busy period that I received an unexpected email from my old high school. Dear Mr. Reyes, Marshall Heights is launching a new career mentorship program for students, particularly focusing on trades and technical paths often overlooked in our college-centric guidance. Given your impressive career trajectory, we would be honored if you would consider being our keynote speaker at the program launch next month. Many of our students come from working-class backgrounds similar to yours, and we believe your story would provide valuable perspective and inspiration. Sincerely, Principal Nathaniel Westeye stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. Part of me was touched to be asked. Another part wondered if this was some sort of charity request, the successful alumnus returning to inspire the underprivileged kids, and beneath it all, the lingering ghost of my teenage self, invisible in those same hallways. I showed the email to Eliza that evening. What do you think? She considered it carefully. I think it depends on why you do it. If it's to prove something to people who doubted you, maybe pass. But if it's for kids who need to hear that their path might not look like everyone else's, that could be meaningful. As always, she cut straight to the heart of the matter. The next day, I called Principal West to discuss the program in more detail. He explained that they were trying to address a significant gap in their career guidance. Many students felt pressured toward 4-year colleges they couldn't afford and didn't necessarily want, while valuable technical careers went unexplored. We've done these kids a disservice, he admitted frankly. Not everyone needs or wants a traditional college path, but we've been selling it as the only route to success. What exactly would you want me to talk about? I asked. Your journey, he said. Simply, the reality of starting in maintenance and building from there, the skills that transferred between roles, the opportunities you found that others might have overlooked. I agreed to think about it, but already knew I would accept. Not to impress anyone from my past, but because I'd have given anything to hear such a talk when I was 17. The evening of the presentation arrived faster than I expected. I stood in the school auditorium, renovated since my time but still recognizable, adjusting my collar nervously as students and parents filed in. Mr. Reyes, a young woman approached, hand extended. I'm Lucia Mendez, student body president. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Her earnest enthusiasm reminded me of myself at that age, ambitious but uncertain, eager to find a path forward. Thanks for having me, I replied. Bit strange being back here after all these years. I heard you used to work as a janitor here after school, she said, no judgment in her tone. My mom cleans offices downtown. She's working tonight, actually. Couldn't make it. Tell her I said the work she does matters, I said. More than most people realize. Principal West introduced me moments later, and suddenly I was standing at the podium facing a sea of young faces, some attentive, others clearly dragged there by parents or teachers. 20 years ago, I began. I stood on this stage at graduation with no clue what I was doing next. College wasn't an option financially, at least not right away. What I did have was a work ethic my father taught me and a job offer to clean. Corporate offices at night. I paused, scanning the room. I know what some of you are thinking, cleaning bathrooms, no thanks. I thought that too at first. But here's what I learned. Every job teaches you something if you're paying attention. For the next 30 minutes, I walked them through my journey. The night classes while working full-time. The sideways moves that became upward ones. The opportunities that came from being the person who understood buildings from the ground. Up rather than just from blueprints. I won't pretend it was easy, I told them honestly. There were nights I fell asleep over textbooks after 8-hour shifts. Times I questioned whether it was worth it. People who dismissed me based solely on my job title. I took a breath. But I also won't pretend you need a fancy degree or family connections to build something meaningful. Sometimes the paths with the most obstacles lead to places others never find. During the Q&A session afterward, a boy in the back raised his, "Nick, did you always know what you wanted to do?" I laughed. Not even close. I just knew I wanted stability first, then growth, then eventually the chance to create something lasting. The form that took evolved over time. Was it hard having friends who were going to college while you were working? Asked another student. Yes, I said simply. There were moments of real doubt and envy, but comparison is the thief of joy. I had to learn to measure my success against my own goals, not someone else's timeline. Afterward, parents and students lined up to talk one-on-one. I stayed until the last question was answered, the last hand shaken. As the crowd thinned, I noticed a familiar figure waiting near the exit. Margot. That was quite a speech. She said as I approached. I almost didn't recognize you up there, so confident. What brings you here? I asked, genuinely curious. My nephew's a junior, she explained. But honestly, I was curious what you'd say. And I'm starting to think, I've been in the wrong business, she said with a small smile. Your approach to property development makes mine look soulless by comparison. I shrugged. Different priorities. Maybe, she conceded. But I've been thinking about what you said about Elmwood Heights, about those families. It stuck with me. Occupational hazard of getting older, I said. Developing a conscience. She laughed, and for a moment we were just two adults having a conversation. The weight of our shared past momentarily lifted. If you're ever interested in a partnership, on a project, she said as she turned to leave, I think we could learn from each other. I watched her go, marveling at how life continually presents opportunities for reinvention, not just for ourselves, but for how we see others. 1 year after the reunion that had unexpectedly changed the trajectory of my life, I stood in the community garden of Elmwood Heights, watching residents plant tomatoes and peppers in raised beds we'd installed during the renovation. Children darted between the plots. Elderly tenants taught younger ones about seedlings, and the sense of community was palpable. This turned out even better than you imagined, Eliza said, slipping her hand into mine. She was right. The building renovations had been completed on time and under budget. energy-efficient appliances, updated plumbing, reinforced security systems, and solar panels that had already reduced electricity costs by 30%. Most importantly, we'd managed it without displacing a single resident or raising rents beyond a minimal cost of living adjustment. What I hadn't anticipated was how the project would transform my career. The publicity around Elmwood Heights, fueled partly by contrast with typical development practices, had caught the attention of city officials struggling with their own affordable housing crisis. Now I was consulting on municipal housing policy, while continuing to expand my property portfolio with a new focus on community-centered development. "Mr. Reyes," Mrs. Abernathy called from her tomato plot, "come see how tall they've grown already." I walked over to admire her thriving plants, remembering our first conversation when I'd purchased the building. She'd been terrified of eviction, having already been displaced twice in 5 years as her neighborhood gentrified. The relief on her face when I explained my intentions had been worth every penny of the investment. My phone buzzed. A text from Brennan. "Don't forget, 7 p.m. at Rivera's. The whole crew's coming to celebrate." Tonight was a double celebration. Diego had won his city council race, becoming the first Latino representative from our district, and I had officially launched the Reyes Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to developing affordable housing throughout the city. "We should head home and change," Eliza reminded me, checking her watch. As we walked to our car, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey, from the scared kid mopping floors to the man who now shaped housing policy, a path that had seemed impossible but had unfolded one determined step at a time. Home was our dream house on Lakeside Drive, the one Eliza had sketched all those years ago. Modern but warm, with walls of windows overlooking the water, and enough space for the family we hoped to start soon. We'd moved in 6 months ago after construction was finally complete, and sometimes I still couldn't believe it was ours. "Where?" "The blue shirt," Eliza called from the closet as I stepped out of the shower. "It brings out your eyes." "Yes, ma'am," I laughed, following orders. An hour later, we pulled up to Rivera's, a local Mexican restaurant owned by Diego's cousin. The private room in back was already buzzing with conversation and laughter when we entered. "There he is," Brennan exclaimed, rushing over to embrace me. "Man of the hour." "Pretty sure that's Diego," I deflected, nodding toward our friend who was already holding court at the center table. "Co-men of the hour, then," Brennan insisted. "This foundation of yours is going to change lives." The gathering was everything I once thought impossible. Genuine friendships with people who saw me for who I really was, professional accomplishments that made a tangible difference, and the quiet confidence that came from building a life on my own terms. Midway through dinner, the restaurant door opened and a hush fell over our group. Vaughn Whitfield stood awkwardly in the doorway, clearly unsure of his welcome. "Sorry I'm late," he said. Traffic was brutal. Diego had invited him, part of their unlikely alliance on the housing committee. I'd been surprised when Vaughn had volunteered for the role, even more surprised when he'd proven genuinely committed to the cause. I stood and walked over, extending my hand. "Glad you made it." Relief washed over his face as he shook it firmly. "Wouldn't miss it. This partnership between your foundation and the city council is going to be groundbreaking." As we rejoined the table, conversation resumed. I found myself observing the scene with a strange sense of detachment, this moment so far from anything my teenage self could have imagined. "Speech!" someone called out, and soon others took up the chant. Diego stood first, glass raised. "To new beginnings and old friends," he said. "To a city where everyone deserves a home they can afford." Cheers erupted around the table, then all eyes turned to me. I rose slowly, still uncomfortable with the spotlight, but learning to accept it when necessary. 20 years ago, I began. "If you'd told me I'd be standing here tonight, I wouldn't have believed you. Not because of what I'd accomplish. I've always been stubborn enough to believe in hard work, but because of who I'd be standing with." I looked around the table, at Eliza, my anchor, at Brennan, who'd never seen me as less than, at Diego, who'd recognized leadership in me before I saw it myself. Even at Vaughn, proof that people could change. Life doesn't always give you what you want, I continued. Sometimes it gives you what you need instead. I needed to clean floors to understand the value of making spaces better. I needed to be overlooked to learn how to truly see others. I raised my glass. To the paths that shaped us, the work that defines us, and the people who finally see us. Later that night, as Eliza and I stood on our deck overlooking the moonlit lake, she wrapped her arms around my waist and rested her head against my shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts," she murmured. "I was just thinking about my dad," I said softly, "wishing he could see all this." "He does," she said with certainty. "Every time you fight for a family to keep their home, every time you remember the name of the person cleaning your office, he sees." 2 days later, I received an unexpected email from Principal West. "Dear Dominic, I wanted to share some news that might interest you. After your talk last year, we've seen a remarkable 60% increase in students pursuing technical and trades education. Your story resonated deeply with many of our students who previously felt their only option was a traditional college path. Additionally, we've established the Reyes Scholarship, funded by several alumni who were moved by your journey. It will provide financial support to students entering facilities management, maintenance engineering, and related fields. Would you be willing to serve on the selection committee? Regards, Nathaniel West." I read the email twice. Emotion catching. In my throat, I thought of my father who had taught me that dignity comes not from what you do, but how you do it. I thought of my younger self, who had felt so invisible while cleaning those same hallways after hours. "Everything okay?" Eliza asked, noticing my expression. "More than okay," I replied, showing her the email. "It's come full circle." She smiled, knowingly. "You're going to accept, aren't you?" Of course, I nodded, but I want to add a condition. The following week, I sat in Principal West's office, finalizing details for the scholarship. "We're thrilled you'll be involved," he said. "Your connection to the students is invaluable." "About that additional funding I mentioned," I began, pulling out the paperwork I'd prepared. "I'd like to establish an annual salary supplement for the maintenance staff here. They're integral to this school's success, but rarely recognized for it." Principal West looked surprised but pleased. "That's extraordinarily generous." "It's necessary," I corrected gently, "and long overdue." As I left the school that afternoon, I passed the gymnasium where the fateful reunion had taken place. Through the doors, I could see a custodian methodically mopping the floor, the same job I'd done 2 decades earlier. "Excuse me," I said, approaching him. "I just wanted to say thank you for the work you do here. It matters." He looked up, momentarily startled, then smiled. "Appreciate that. Not many people notice." "I do," I assured him. "I was in your shoes once. Best education I ever got." Walking to my car, I felt a profound sense of peace. The mockery at the reunion had stung, yes, but it had also forced me to confront lingering insecurities I'd thought long buried. In doing so, I'd found not just validation, but purpose, a way to transform my success into something meaningful for others. I drove home to Eliza and our dream house on the lake, to the foundation that would help families stay in their homes, to the life we'd built, not despite my humble beginnings, but because of them. The deed to our house sat framed in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that success isn't measured by what you own, but by what you build that lasts beyond you. And as I pulled into our driveway, watching the sunset reflect off the water, I felt nothing but gratitude for the path that had brought me here, mop, bucket, and all.